Hello there. Before it gets too dark out here in the Pacific Northwest, I wanted to make a video here sharing something I've been chewing with for a while. This first came on my radar when I was working with sort of a behavioral designer, a habit expert in Sweden last year and earlier this year. And one of the things he and I got to talking about quite a bit was the true power of what we think of as serious play. Now, this is a funny sort of idea, but if you are looking to develop more of your creative capacity, your problem-solving ability, your emotional intelligence, really all of the things that we might consider sort of higher brain functions, this is probably one of your greatest assets. And so let's maybe start by taking a step back and defining what play is, because if we're going to be talking about that, I know it means wildly different things to different people, depending on what kind of circles you run in, what kind of stuff you're into. So let's talk about what play is in this particular context. When we're talking about play in this sense, really we're looking at the more sort of anthropological or the evolutionary definition of play, which even those folks have a hard time defining it. But basically what they look at is play is whatever an animal does when it's warm, fat, and happy. That is actually a definition in the academic literature. You can look it up. But when an animal is warm, fat, and happy, that animal plays. And what we know is that across species, the more intelligent the animal is, although, different measures of that, but the more intelligent the animal, the more that animal plays. So, of course, we see some birds engage in things that we might consider play. We see various mammals do so much more often. And then, of course, if you've ever spent any time around human kids, you know that we, humans, play quite a bit as well. Now, we might look at what the function of that is, because nothing is really accidental when it comes to human behavior. All behavior is adaptive. It gets something done. And so if we want to look at what's the function of play, well, really, what it fundamentally does is it helps us develop behavioral flexibility. It encodes certain behaviors into us from an early age, right? We learn about good and evil through cops and robbers. We learn about survival strategies through hide and seek. These things, there's a reason they appear across cultures. They point to something pretty fundamental. And the ubiquity of play across human cultures points to something really fundamental about its importance. So what play does is it helps us, again, develop behavioral flexibility. It introduces us to creative thinking. It helps us develop different imaginary models of the world and engage in those, see how they might be. We get to try on different roles, right? If you imagine sort of cops and robbers game, you get to try on sort of rudimentary, fundamental patterns of good and evil, right? Now, I don't want to get too philosophical with this because for our intents and purposes, there are really practical applications too. What play does is it creates a situation that is intensely cognitively engaging. It gets you immersed in it. And so if you've ever read anything about flow states, you might think kids playing tag, they are so deep in it without any knowledge of the academic literature on flow states, right? But they find themselves enmeshed in this, and they're the better for it. They get the physical benefits, they're moving themselves, they get the intellectual, the social benefits. Play offers us, as the most highly developed organism on the planet, it offers us full spectrum benefits to everything we might do with ourselves. And so again, it's not just a kids thing. This is something that we can engage in day to day if we know the conditions to do so. So again, even the academic definition of what play is and does not points to how we might create some of these conditions for ourselves, right? So play, again, is an intensely cognitively focused activity that takes place when an animal is warm, fat, and happy. This points to the fact that if you are dealing with chronic, ongoing stress, that's ground zero. That's where you've got to start if you want to make a change in this, is you've got to take care of that burden of stress so that you can then be warm and fat and happy, right? So, when you are warm, fat, and happy, then you can play, yeah? But play isn't just something that takes place. There's got to be a bit of an impetus. And if you look at kids, right, the main impetus for playful behavior is boredom, right? when you're bored, you engage in something playful. You look for something to do. You take a cup and think of all the different ways you could make use out of that. You play whatever little games you can think of with it, right? So we've got to find some way of becoming more comfortable with the discomfort of boredom. When we can do so, the stage is ripe for all sorts of playful behaviors. But that's only one piece of the puzzle. See, in any game, it follows a certain sequence of things. There's a repetition within the game, right? There are the same rules to cops and robbers, but it wouldn't be a game if someone was always the cop and someone was always the robber. That's boring. So what do we do when we're bored? Well, we change the rules. We introduce bits of variation, yeah, so that we keep it interesting, because the true purpose of play, at least from the standpoint of the players, is to keep the game going. And we see this in other animals too, like in rat studies, they'll wrestle for fun. They really actually thrive on that social component. They will choose that over drugs. Like, it's pretty clear in the academic literature. But so these rats, they'll wrestle with each other. But if there's a bigger rat, it will kick the little rat's butts. And so the game doesn't keep going if they just keep playing full out like that. So the rats they'll limit themselves simply to keep the game going. That's how much benefit they get out of it. Like, they will handicap themselves. They will not go all out. They will let the little rats win from time to time, because the big rats love playing the game as much as the little rats. So again, even rats will do this. Why aren't you? Well, probably because you're chronically stressed, but I digress. That's a whole other can of worms. So what we can do is find in these certain behaviors that you'd like to change, these habits of yours that you want to improve, or in a business sense, for example, you look at a particular situation that you want to change, a situation that's frustrating or boring or stagnating. You've got to take a keen look then. How can you start to introduce little bits of variation into that? Because that's how play works. We keep the same structures going and we add in little bits of things to shake up that structure some. But the structure persists. So it's not that you play by throwing out everything you've ever done, right? That is not an effective way to get some of these benefits we're talking about. The way to do it is find deliberate variation in the things you're engaging in. Now, of course, one of the easiest situations to do this, to really embody this lesson, is through a movement practice. So really, when you think about the things you do to move your body day in and day out, when was the last time it really felt playful? When was the last time it felt exploratory or cognitively engaging? When was the last time you went into a training session and you didn't know how it was going to go? See, that's one of the other key characteristics of play, is that you don't know how the game is going to end. If it's a good game, anyone could win, right? Like, my girlfriend and I will play board games. We love those sort of things. And there are certain games where I'm much better, certain games she's much better. What we do, in order not to flip the frickin' board game up, is we introduce variations in the rules to keep it interesting, make sure we level the playing field some, because if one of us was just trouncing the other over and over and over again, it wouldn't be fun. We know how it's going to go. So if you're interested in expanding your creative capacities, in developing keener problem-solving abilities, in expanding your emotional intelligence too, it's all about play. Like, that's built into the structure of play. And again, one of the easiest ways we can go about weaving this into our life more and more is through the way we move. So really, like, when was the last time you went out to move your body and didn't know how it was going to go? When was the last time you found yourself confused or puzzled or stumped in your movement practice, right? I mean, sure, if you're in a specific strength training scenario, if there's a certain performance goal you want to run at a certain pace, you need a bit of structure in that. But even to keep it an engaging structure across time, you've got to introduce bits of variation, or else it's just a chore. It's a mechanical grind. It's just not fun. So when you're looking at how you can start to weave these things in, again, it's got to start with that foundation of safety, right? Getting yourself out of the chronic stress loop of sympathetic arousal within your nervous system, that fight-flight mode. You must establish a baseline of safety. Games can be risky, but they're not fun if they're dangerous, right? And people measure danger in very different ways. I remember when I was a teenager, our version of fun was making little bombs. We would make bombs, we would make explosives. We were having fun with chemistry. We were taking the boring subject and making it much more interesting. It made us figure out some of those chemical reactions pretty quickly. I wouldn't recommend doing that necessarily. But anyway, I digress there too, a bit of a tangent. So when we're looking at these things, truly, you've got to find some way to maintain a bit of a structure, but finding that variation within the structure. That's how learning takes place. That's how evolution takes place. That's how all of the ongoing self-organizing generative processes that we know of, that's how they all operate, is repetition with variation. So when you're going through a movement practice, you might look for common themes, right? Let's say you're looking to develop your squat, for example. Well, when was the last time you squatted on an uneven surface, an imbalanced surface, squatting with various foot positions, squatting while carrying various loads, carrying those loads in various ways? Shoot, within the last 10 seconds, we have 5 different variations you could look at in a squat. Here's the challenge, though. Looking for external sources to continuously give you new games is going to keep you dependent. There's no other way around it. The way to really get through this is to get, keenly comfortable with discomfort. The more comfortable you can get with boredom throughout your day-to-day life, the better chance you're going to have of this. Now, I want to give you kind of the cautionary tale on the other side of the picture too, because some people cannot handle being bored, right? It's stripped from us. We've always got devices in front of us. We've always got something to do, something to distract ourselves. People have a very difficult time being bored, which totally stunts their cognitive ability. There's always something to distract them from the feeling of boredom, something to numb themselves. I talked with a guy over the weekend who has been addicted to marijuana for the last 10 years, smoking 14 joints a day. Now, this particular guy, we got sort of curious. It's all right, I'm not going to judge addictive behavior. That's stupid. The addictive behavior serves a purpose. So when I asked him, what's the typical situation you find yourself smoking in? He said, well, it's anytime I have dead time between the things I have to do. Whenever I get bored, it's just the thing I do. And I was like, oh, well, you don't know how to be bored very well, do you? You don't know how to cope with the discomfort of boredom. And I get it. Being bored is difficult. It's uncomfortable. It forces us to just sit in the soup of it until we figure out something to do. But if you can rest within that discomfort, if you can be with that discomfort of boredom, something in you will mobilize. You will figure out something to do. Something, not just a distraction, a compulsion, or whatever. You'll figure out something that's actually engaging for you. So if you want a little takeaway of this, I would encourage you to do nothing for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, maybe only 3 minutes if that's whatever you can take. Find that sweet spot. Find the threshold where you sense within yourself the compulsion to check out or distract yourself or numb yourself from that feeling. And wait. Sit with that. Notice whatever comes up through that. And you will find within you some pull to do something that isn't just a compulsion. It's actually an organic bubbling up of curiosity or excitement or a frustration. Maybe it's an eruption of frustration. Whatever the case is, that's where breakthrough behavior really occurs. It's when we can sit through and find the other side of boredom. Make no mistake, things organize out of that boredom. You will develop all sorts of new behaviors if you can sit through that boredom. But only if you can not distract or numb or throw up your hands in defeat along the way. So, if we're looking to weave this into an ongoing practice, you gotta establish that contrast more frequently of doing nothing on a more regular basis. And I know for most of the people watching this, That's a really difficult proposition. Like, believe me, you're not the first one I've heard that from. The people I work with, like, they get to where they got in life by driving and doing and pushing and reaching and all of that until it stops working. So what do you do when the old behaviors stop working? Well, you have to learn some new behaviors. And how do we fundamentally learn? Well, as a species, it's through play. So if you'd like a little more guided support with this, feel free to shoot me a message. Happy to see what your situation is like, talk through whether this would make sense for us to continue. Outside of that, really I recommend set some deliberate time for contrast. Be still, do nothing, be bored. See what bubbles up from that for you. It's going to be something much more engaging than scrolling through Facebook. I promise you that. So with that said, get the hell off of Facebook. Go do something else right now. Actually, no. Go do nothing right now. Let's see what comes of it.